Humanity tends to see itself as the ruler of the world, but it constantly underestimates the power of nature. And nature always finds a way to remind us who's really in charge. That's exactly what World War Z 2013 shows us. Nature created a virus to get rid of a plague that brought destruction and wiped out what nature had spent millions of years building. A world without humans, a zombie apocalypse. Sounds almost perfect. World War Z is arguably one of the best films in its genre, but it's not perfect. A huge part of the story happens off-screen. If you want to know how bees became carriers of the virus, what role termites and ants played, what truly caused the outbreak, where the zero patient was discovered, and many other details that were never shown in the film, then this video is exactly what you're looking for. My name is Evgeny, and today we're diving into a full breakdown of World War Z. We'll go through all the deleted and hidden material from the film. I promise, it's going to be interesting. Let's begin. So, to understand why half of the original material was cut from the film, we need to look at the brief history behind the making of World War Z 2013. Production began back in 2007 after Brad Pitt's company Plan B Entertainment acquired the rights to adapt Max Brooks' novel World War Z. The first screenplay was written by J. Michael Straczynski, and it was actually very close to the original story from the book. But in March 2008, that early script leaked online. Because of that leak, the studio decided in 2009 to bring in Matthew Michael Carnahan to rewrite and completely rethink the story. As a result, all of the political subtext was removed from the draft. In the end, the new writer created a story of his own, one that was noticeably different from the original book. The producer's main idea was driven by a very specific goal: to secure the film's release in China. The problem was that in the original script, just like in Max Brooks' novel, the zero patient was discovered in China, and that storyline would have caused serious issues with the country's strict censorship system. So in 2011, when filming officially began, the origin of the pandemic was moved to the Philippines. The first recorded zombie outbreak was now set there, and this detail is actually very important. All of those scenes were eventually cut from the final version of the film, but they contain answers to many of the questions we're going to break down in this video. By early 2012, the movie had finished filming, but the result didn't satisfy the producers, so the team brought in another writer, Damon Lindelof. His task was to completely rewrite the third act of the film, but because of extremely tight deadlines, things started to fall apart again. Damon simply couldn't keep up while working on both Prometheus and World War Z 2013 at the same time, so his drafts were handed over to Drew Goddard, so he could finally bring the film to completion. The studio ended up allocating another $65 million to shoot 40 minutes of new material. As a result, we can see that it took 6 years to create the final version of World War Z 2013. And the core story written by Matthew Michael Carnahan wasn't replaced. It was expanded by 2 additional writers, and that's a key point: expanded, not rewritten, which means the answers to the biggest questions, what caused the outbreak, and how the zombie pandemic actually began, can still be found in the original source. Now that you understand the full complexity behind the film's production, I think it's the perfect moment to move into the breakdown. And to the first major question, what exactly caused the Solanum virus? The virus that turns a human into a zombie. This pathogen wasn't created in a lab, it wasn't man-made. This is the work of Mother Nature. The destruction of natural habitats is driven mainly by human activity: deforestation, industrial waste, pollution, contaminated water, and the overconsumption of resources. All of this disrupts a fragile ecosystem. Humanity is a plague on planet Earth, and so nature had no choice but to begin preparing a cleansing. The first time it tested this approach was in 1918. A massive pandemic was caused by the H1N1 virus, better known as the Spanish flu. It infected at least 550 million people. That's around 30% of the world's population. The exact number of deaths is still unknown, but the commonly accepted estimate is up to 100 million. And that was only the beginning. A warning shot. Nature ran its test and quickly realized that if it wanted to completely wipe out humanity, it would need something far more aggressive. In the original script, the emergence of the virus is described very clearly. It didn't start in just one place. It appeared across multiple continents almost at the same time. In 2012, Nature made another attempt, but this time it completely changed its methods. Insects became the carriers. In Australia, a young boy was bitten by a bulldog ant and developed a strange allergic reaction. He had a high fever, seizures, vomiting, and signs of increased aggression. But he didn't turn into a zombie. The virus was rapidly studying its host and mutating just as quickly. Doctors couldn't understand what was happening. They believed it was a new strain of rabies. 2 days later, the boy died. At the same time, in Côte d'Ivoire, a young girl from a local tribe was poisoned after eating termites. Her symptoms were exactly the same as the boy's in Australia, but she was far more aggressive and survived for 2 full months before eventually dying. At the time, doctors didn't pay much attention to this new fever. The cases were isolated, but they were being recorded across different continents, including the Philippine Islands. That's where the virus went on the offensive. Up until that point, it had only been studying and evolving. But in the Philippines, everything changed. In a small settlement, a brother and his little sister were working at their family's apiary. The girl was stung by a bee. She collapsed and started convulsing. When her brother rushed over to help, she suddenly bit him on the foot and ran off. The villagers searched for the poor girl all night, but couldn't find her. Meanwhile, the boy's condition rapidly worsened. By the next morning, he was dead. But just before the doctor arrived, he miraculously came back to life and immediately attacked his mother, trying to bite her. When the doctor reached the village, the boy was already being restrained. They had tied his mouth shut, but even that didn't stop him. He broke free and infected everyone. The village was located far from any densely populated cities, so the infection couldn't spread further. But in India and South Korea, the virus truly revealed its dominance. When former UN investigator Jerry Lane arrives at a military base in South Korea, he learns a lot from former CIA operative Gunther Hafner. Hafner had been working closely with the government of North Korea, supplying weapons to the country. According to him, shortly before the global pandemic began, North Korea carried out a mass tooth extraction across its entire population in just 24 hours.
They pulled the teeth of all 23 million in less than 24 hours.
Bullshit.
Jerry didn't believe Gunther's story, but in the original script, this entire exchange is much longer. First, Gunther explains that when the North Koreans contacted him, they offered a deal to buy out all of his weapons, the entire arsenal, as fast as possible. They didn't even ask about the price. At that moment, he assumed they were preparing for war. In the end, the weapons were delivered through secure channels. But something felt off. Gunther was troubled by the fact that he didn't encounter a single border checkpoint. The entire military was positioned around major cities. They were clearly preparing for defense, but he still didn't understand who they were planning to defend against. And when he finally met with the authorities and the general, he noticed something disturbing. None of them had teeth. Gunther had never seen anything like it. It terrified the former operative. So he started digging for answers. He managed to find out that North Korean intelligence had learned about the wall being built in Israel and had also intercepted communications coming out of India. At that time, India was already at war with the zombies. At first, Jerry didn't believe a word of it, so Gunther offered to show him proof. Among his personal belongings, he had a flash drive. On it was a recording of a television broadcast that had aired in North Korea. The footage showed step-by-step instructions on how to quickly remove your teeth. After the procedure, people were told to apply a special ointment to cauterize the open wounds. Everyone had to do it, no exceptions. A smiling, happy family without teeth. Even the children were celebrating. And for those who couldn't do it themselves, temporary extraction stations were set up in every city. Even party leaders were required to go through the procedure. On the second video file, there's footage of clashes between zombies and the South Korean military. You can clearly see that the infected don't have the same body temperature as a normal human, because they're essentially the living dead, and they don't eat flesh. They simply bite their victims. That's how the North Koreans quickly figured it out. If you remove the teeth of the entire population, you take away the zombie's main weapon. Without bites, the virus can't spread. The pandemic becomes impossible to sustain. But after the reshoots, all of this was cut from the final version of World War Z, 2013. And because of that, it ends up feeling like Jerry just believed the words of a madman, like he had no other choice. Later, after the release of World War Z, 2013, the director Mark Forster explained that he was facing an impossible task, trying to fit the entire story of Max Brooks' novel into a single film. He also said that the deleted material could have been used in future sequels. And there's one more important detail. Right at the beginning of the film, hidden in the opening credits, he left subtle clues. That's why you see shots of ants, termites, and bees, because those opening credits were created at the very end of the production process. The second important detail. You probably noticed that the speed of transformation varies. At the early stage of the virus, it took hours, sometimes even days. When Jerry hears the story about what he believes is the zero patient, we learn that a doctor examined a deserter in a barn and then came back and bit all of his patients, which means the virus took several hours to take control. But later, things changed dramatically. Soldier Stevie and Captain Speak turn into zombies within 5 minutes after being infected. Colonel Davidson takes around 10 minutes, and when Jerry first encounters the zombies in Philadelphia, he realizes something terrifying. The infection process now takes just 12 seconds. At the command center, we get even more information. Scientists are gathering data from all over the world, analyzing it, and trying to identify the true zero patient. Amid all this chaos, we can see on the monitors that the global pandemic spreads most intensely in densely populated cities, especially in places with major airport hubs. The data shows that only about 5% of the world's population doesn't get infected immediately. For everyone else, it takes just 12 seconds.
About 5% won't turn immediately.
This inconsistency in transformation time is never really explained in the film. But in reality, the scientists at the command center are missing a crucial detail. The transmission chain. The first people infected by insects could carry the virus for weeks without turning. After they bit a second person, the transformation took days. After the next bite, hours. And with each new link in the chain, the process accelerated until it reached just 12 seconds. That's how the virus managed to spread across every continent, fast and almost invisible. An unsuspecting person would board a plane, cross an ocean, and only later turn into a zombie. Without that delay, the consequences of the pandemic wouldn't have been nearly as catastrophic or as global. In South Korea, the outbreak began 11 days earlier than in Philadelphia, and Israel had already started building the wall 2 weeks before that, after intercepting a message from Indian General Arakshasa. This time, nature seemed to account for everything. It created an entire chain of transmission. And that's why, in such a short period of time, the virus was able to cross oceans and reach almost every corner of the planet, except for parts of Central Europe, Canada, Greenland, and many remote islands. On one of the maps, we can see that there are no recorded cases in Ukraine, Turkey, Moldova, and Poland. Meanwhile, Moscow has already been completely overrun by the pandemic. But the virus spread so fast that during just a 2-minute conversation between the scientists, the situation on the map changes. And by the time Jerry arrives in South Korea, the Zeke have already flooded nearly every country, almost every country. And there's one important detail here, something we'll definitely come back to later. The third detail. How the virus spreads, and what it's actually capable of. When Jerry and his family are trying to reach the rooftop, they run into zombies on the staircase. At one point, infected blood gets into Jerry's mouth. He immediately starts counting, and after narrowly escaping death, he does everything he can to reduce any risk to his family. Standing on the edge of the roof, he counts all the way to 12 seconds. But nothing happens. His body doesn't get infected. When I first watched that scene, it reminded me of 28 Days Later, where just a single drop of blood gets into Frank's eye, and he turns almost instantly. The rage virus could survive inside a dead bird, remaining active and dangerous for a long time. But in World War Z 2013, everything works the opposite way. The Solanum virus dies almost instantly when exposed to open air. Here, I need to warn you right away. In the film, the properties and behavior of the virus were heavily reworked and differ significantly from Max Brooks' original novel. Unlike in the book in World War Z, 2013, the zombies, the Zekes, never actually eat their victims. Their only goal is to bite. And once a person is infected, they immediately lose interest. The zombies switch to new targets right away. You can also notice signs of collective behavior. The Zekes act together. If one of them finds a victim, it's as if the others instantly know, like there's some kind of signal linking them. Because the third act of the film was almost completely rewritten and reshot, we're never shown what the virologists at the World Health Organization Research Center actually discovered. And they had everything: resources, blood samples, equipment, even a captured Zeke for study. What they managed to uncover is something much deeper. This virus forms a kind of symbiosis. The pathogen is almost impossible to contract through the blood of the Zekes. Most of the viral load is concentrated in their saliva, and it has to enter the bloodstream of a healthy person directly. Zekes behave like stinging insects. Their primary weapon is the bite. The virus is not airborne. It dies almost instantly once it's outside a host. Scratches or open wounds don't guarantee infection. But if saliva gets into the bloodstream, the transformation is immediate. And once that happens, the person completely loses control of their body. As the virus reaches the frontal lobe, it takes over all bodily functions. The first things it shuts down are the heart and the lungs. Every trace of personality is erased, including memory. The brain is reprogrammed with a single purpose: to spread the virus. From that point on, it processes only one type of information: the location of living, uninfected humans. They don't need to see clearly, feel pain, or even feed. In the end, they're nothing more than tools in the hands of nature. And sooner or later, they all die anyway. That's why the Zekes have very poor eyesight, but their hearing is a completely different story.
The noise. Are they drawn to it?
Yeah. Sound draws them.
First, they can distinguish background noise, the sound of rain, thunder, or a flowing river. They can tell exactly where it's coming from and how far away it is. So they don't just mindlessly chase a helicopter. They understand they can't reach it, and its noise doesn't attract them, at least not right away. On top of that, the zombies are capable of a form of communication. At the World Health Organization Research Center, scientists noticed something unusual. Whenever a zombie spotted a target, it would always let out a specific scream first. That scream acted like a signal, telling the others that a human had been found. When the Zekes remain in silence for long periods of time, they enter a dormant state to conserve energy. Even in that state, they still make sounds, but much quieter. A low, rumbling murmur, which means the living dead are constantly communicating with each other. And honestly, that's not surprising. In nature, sound is one of the primary ways living organisms communicate. The second anomaly was the absence of autolysis. The zombies didn't decompose. They didn't rot. There was no smell of decay. Instead of blood, a black fluid would seep from their wounds. Because once the virus entered the body, it didn't just kill the host, it also destroyed the microbes and bacteria responsible for decomposition. As a result, the flesh remained preserved. No rot, no odor. And that allowed the body to last much longer without nutrients. The third, and one of the strangest details, is the level of aggression. If a zombie is placed in a closed room where it can see and hear people, its brain actually evaluates the situation. It understands that it can't overcome certain obstacles like reinforced glass. In that case, it doesn't mindlessly slam itself against the barrier. It waits for the right moment. It doesn't waste energy trying to break through something it knows it can't overcome. Which means that even in this state, some traces of intelligence, however minimal, still remain. But when there are many Zekes, they begin to act like a single organism, a kind of collective mind, very similar to how ant colonies function. They can build bridges and climb high walls using their own bodies. And this kind of behavior isn't unusual in nature. Many insects act the same way, especially ants. To overcome obstacles, the Zeeks merge into one massive structure, using every individual body as part of a larger system. It's an incredibly efficient use of their resources. But there's one more detail that the scientists at the World Health Organization Research Center couldn't fully explain. When Jerry and his team head into Wing B to retrieve deadly pathogens for the experiment, one of the doctors gives them a warning. They must not kill the Zeeks, because doing so would drive the others into a frenzy.
Try not to kill one.
It only makes the rest of them more aggressive.
Unfortunately, the film never really explains this behavior, but in the original script, that dialogue is much more detailed. One of the doctors points out that when a single Zeke is killed, the others seem to sense it and instantly become far more aggressive. They couldn't determine exactly what triggers it, but they notice something similar in nature. In termites and bees, if you kill a single bee, it can provoke the entire swarm. The hive immediately switches into attack mode. It's a defense mechanism. When a bee dies, it releases pheromones. The rest of the swarm detects the signal through their sense of smell and becomes aggressive. The Zeeks show the exact same pattern. When one of them dies, a black fluid is released from the body, and that scent drives the others into a frenzy. They immediately attack the threat, trying to eliminate it before more of them are lost. Nature copied the behavior of insects to minimize losses among the infected and to increase its chances of success. And most likely, the same principle applies to camouflage. Somehow, the Zeeks can sense other deadly diseases. If a person is terminally ill, they're no longer of interest to the virus. Mother Nature is a serial killer, the most efficient, the most inventive, and like any killer, it wants to be caught. And what seems like the most terrifying aspect of the virus turns out to be the flaw in its design.
And she loves disguising her weaknesses as strengths. She's a bitch.
Almost everything from the original script made it into the final film, even if it only got a few seconds of screen time. But because of the rushed production, some scenes were changed so drastically that they can feel frustrating when you watch the movie. Remember the moment when Jerry reaches the lab? In the film, he gets trapped in the storage area and takes a radical step. He turns himself into a test subject, injecting random deadly pathogens without knowing what they'll do. Some of them could have killed him instantly. But in the original script, that scene plays out very differently. Jerry holds up each vial to the camera, and whenever he finds the right one, the phone rings. That's the signal that the pathogen is the correct choice. There were also entire sequences that were completely cut from the film, scenes that showed safe countries. While watching the film, it feels like there's no safe place left on Earth, like the entire planet has been consumed by the pandemic. But that's not entirely true. There are regions where not a single case was recorded, places like Canada, Greenland, Iceland, parts of Norway, Alaska, and Siberia. And the reason comes down to temperature. You might think the cold kills the virus, but it doesn't. The real reason is that it prevents the spread. Once the virus enters the body, the heart stops, blood circulation shuts down, the body no longer produces heat, which means the Zeke's bodies drop to the temperature of their surroundings. So in freezing conditions, they simply turn into frozen statues. They can't move. But as soon as the temperature rises, their bodies thaw, and they continue their path of destruction. In fact, the studio deliberately removed this material, and not just this, because originally the plan was to create a full trilogy. In May 2014, Stephen Knight was brought in to write the script, and by 2015, the production process had already begun. In August 2016, David Fincher entered negotiations to direct the sequel. A year later, reports suggested that the follow-up would be released in 2018. But in February 2019, the project was officially cancelled. The Hollywood Reporter pointed out the main issue. The Chinese government's ban on films featuring zombies or ghosts was one of the biggest reasons why Paramount Pictures decided to shut down the sequel. Either way, the project is officially dead, although a sequel script did surface online, and it's actually pretty solid. It includes deeper explanations and much larger scale conflicts. Personally, I really liked World War Z 2013. I would absolutely watch a sequel. What about you? How would you rate the film? Let me know in the comments.